12 German shepherds sat locked in metal kennels, trembling, crying, waiting to be sold to strangers. Military working dogs, heroes who had sniffed out bombs, tracked terrorists, and shielded operators with their own bodies. Now discarded like broken equipment. Buyers circled the kennels, dogfighters, backyard breeders, men who saw dollar signs where medals should have been. Nobody spoke for them. Nobody fought for them. Until a Navy SEAL in digital camouflage walked through the gate, saw what was happening, and said 5 words that changed everything. "I will take all of them." No one expected what happened next. Before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments below. And if this story moves you, please subscribe and follow it until the very end. Let's see how far this journey takes us together. Ethan Cole heard the dogs before he saw them. Not barking, crying. The kind of sound that doesn't come from an animal that's hungry or cold or bored. The kind that comes from something that remembers being loved and understands it's been forgotten. He'd heard that sound once before, in a village in Afghanistan, from a dog chained to a post outside a compound his team had just cleared. The handler was dead inside. The dog was still waiting for him to come out. Ethan had carried that sound in his chest for 6 years, and now it was coming from inside a military facility on American soil. His phone had buzzed at 0430 that morning. Unknown number. One message. "They're selling them. All of them. Today. Fort Sailor Disposition Center. Come now. Bring your dog." He'd stared at the text for 30 seconds. Then he'd grabbed his keys, clipped Diesel's leash, and driven 3 hours without stopping. Diesel, his German shepherd, 80 pounds of tan and black loyalty, sat rigid in the passenger seat, ears rotating like satellite dishes, picking up frequencies Ethan couldn't hear. The dog had been Ethan's MWD partner for 4 deployments before a piece of Taliban shrapnel tore through his hip during a compound breach in Kandahar. Ethan had spent 6 months fighting the military bureaucracy to adopt him. 6 months of paperwork and phone calls and threats from desk officers who said retired military working dogs were government property and couldn't be transferred to private ownership without proper disposition protocols. Ethan had used every favor he'd ever earned, called in every debt, contacted his congressman, contacted his congressman's congressman. And when the paperwork finally came through, he'd driven to the kennel facility at 0500, opened the cage door, and Diesel had walked out and pressed his head against Ethan's chest and stayed there for 10 minutes without moving. That was 2 years ago. Diesel hadn't left Ethan's side since. Now they were standing outside the Fort Sailor Disposition Center, and the sounds coming from inside were making Diesel's hackles rise, like a ridge of dark fur along his spine. "Easy, boy." Ethan put his hand on the dog's head. "Let's see what we're dealing with." He pushed through the gate. The first thing that hit him was the smell. Kennel disinfectant and stress hormones, and the sour tang of fear. A smell Ethan recognized from FOBs and field hospitals and every bad place he'd ever been. The second thing that hit him was the number. 12. 12 German shepherds, locked in transport kennels arranged in 2 rows of 6. Some were pacing in tight circles. Some were pressed against the back walls, trembling. Some were lying flat, eyes open, breathing shallow, the canine equivalent of a 1,000-yard stare. And around them, people. 30, maybe 40 civilians, walking between the rows, pointing, whispering, evaluating. A heavy man in a leather vest knelt in front of one kennel and pried the dog's mouth open to check its teeth. A woman with a clipboard was photographing ear tattoos. 2 men in the back were arguing about breeding potential and bloodline verification. Ethan's stomach turned. "Can I help you?" The voice came from behind a folding table near the entrance. A man in Navy service khakis, mid-40s, soft-bodied, with the pale complexion of someone who'd spent his career behind a desk. Lieutenant Commander Ray Holt. His name was printed on a placard next to a stack of forms and a cash box. "What is this?" Ethan asked. "Surplus Animal Disposition Event." Holt didn't look up from his clipboard. "Dogs that have been retired from the MWD program, available for civilian transfer. You interested in one?" "These are military working dogs." "Retired military working dogs. Failed behavioral assessments. Deemed unsuitable for continued service." Holt finally looked up, eyes landing on Ethan's NWU Type 3 uniform, the green and brown digital camouflage, and then on Diesel, who was already pulling toward the kennels, whining. "That your dog?" "That's my partner." "Cute." Holt's mouth twitched. "Well, if you want to browse, the bidding starts in 20 minutes. Cash or certified check only. All sales final. No returns." Ethan didn't respond. He was already walking toward the kennels. Diesel pulled ahead, nose working overtime, and the moment they reached the first row, every dog in the facility reacted. Heads lifted, ears rotated, noses pressed against kennel bars. They could smell Diesel, could smell the combat on him, the training, the familiar chemical signature of a working dog, and something ancient and desperate woke up behind their eyes. The first dog Ethan recognized was Titan. Titan, a massive shepherd with a chest like a barrel and a scar that ran from his left ear to his jaw. Ethan had deployed with Titan's team in Syria 3 years ago. The dog had detected 17 IEDs in a single week, had saved an entire platoon by alerting on a vehicle-borne explosive that nobody else caught. Titan's handler, Staff Sergeant Rivera, had called him the best nose in the entire U.S. military. Now Titan was pressed against the kennel bars, trembling, his eyes locked on Ethan with an expression that wasn't fear and wasn't hope. It was something in between. Something that said, "I know you. You're one of us. Please." "Hey, buddy." Ethan knelt in front of the kennel. "What are you doing here?" Titan let out a sound that cracked Ethan's chest open. Not a bark, not a whine, a cry. Deep, broken, from somewhere inside the dog that shouldn't have been able to make that kind of noise. Diesel pressed against the kennel beside Ethan, nose to nose with Titan through the bars, and the two dogs held there. Two warriors recognizing each other, speaking a language that didn't need words. Ethan stood and moved to the next kennel. Ranger, explosives detection dog, 6 years of service, legendary nose. Ranger was lying flat, chin on his paws, eyes open but empty. He didn't react when Ethan approached, didn't lift his head, just lay there breathing, as if he'd already accepted that nobody was coming. Next kennel. Blitz, patrol and pursuit dog, the fastest shepherd Ethan had ever seen in the field. A dog that could run down a fleeing suspect across open desert and hold him until the team caught up. Blitz was pacing in tight circles, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. His body was thinner than Ethan remembered. His coat was dull. His eyes were wild. "Jesus," Ethan whispered. Then he saw the last kennel in the row, and his heart stopped. Valor. The name hit him like a fist. Valor. Marcus Webb's dog. Marcus's partner. The shepherd who had deployed with Ethan's best friend on every mission for 3 years. The dog who had been beside Marcus in Yemen. The dog who had survived the blast that killed him. Ethan hadn't seen Valor in 18 months. After Marcus died, Ethan had asked about the dog. Had been told Valor was transferred to another unit. Had been told not to worry about it. Had been told to focus on his own recovery and let the system handle the rest. The system had handled it all right. Handled it right into a metal kennel at a surplus disposal event. Valor was lying on his side, ribs showing through dull, matted fur, eyes half closed. He looked like a dog that had stopped waiting, stopped hoping, stopped believing that anyone was ever going to keep the promises that had been made to him. Ethan dropped to his knees in front of the kennel. "Valor!" The dog's ear twitched. One eye opened wider. Then something shifted behind that eye. Recognition, slow and painful, like a light flickering on in a room that had been dark for too long. "Hey, buddy, it's me. It's Ethan." His voice cracked. He couldn't help it. "Marcus sent me." Valor lifted his head, slowly, like the effort cost him everything he had left. He crawled forward, belly dragging on the kennel floor, until his nose pressed through the bars and touched Ethan's fingers. Then the dog made a sound. Not a bark, not a howl. A cry that carried 18 months of grief and confusion and waiting in it. A cry that said, "I remember. I remember the smell of him. I remember the sound of his voice. I remember the night he didn't come back. And I've been waiting for someone, anyone, to tell me it wasn't my fault." Ethan's vision blurred. He gripped the kennel bars and pressed his forehead against the metal and let the tears come, because there was no way in hell he was going to pretend this was okay. Diesel whined beside him, pressed against his leg, felt the grief vibrate through his handler's body, and responded the only way a dog knows how: by being there, by not leaving. "What happened to you?" Ethan whispered. "What did they do to you?" "Sir, the bidding area is to the left." A young petty officer appeared beside him, clipboard in hand, clearly uncomfortable. "If you'd like to register." "Who authorized this?" "Sir?" "These dogs." Ethan stood up. His voice was controlled, but the petty officer took a step back anyway. The way people do when they sense danger they can't see. "Who authorized their retirement and disposition?" I'd have to check with Lieutenant Commander Holt." "Then check." The petty officer hurried away. Ethan turned back to the kennels, counted again. 12 dogs. 12 military working dogs with combined decades of service, thousands of missions. God knew how many lives saved. Lined up in metal boxes like surplus inventory, waiting to be liquidated. He walked back to Holt's table. "These dogs," Ethan said. "When were they retired?" Holt looked up with the practiced patience of a bureaucrat, dealing with someone he considered beneath his pay grade. "Various dates over the past 6 months. Standard disposition process. I know 3 of these dogs personally. I deployed with their teams. Titan cleared 17 IEDs in 1 week in Syria. Ranger detected a suicide vest at a checkpoint in Iraq that would have killed 30 Marines. And Valor," Ethan's voice tightened. "Valor was the K-9 partner of SEAL operator Marcus Webb, who died in action 18 months ago." "I'm aware of the service records." "Then how are they here?" "They failed their behavioral reassessments." Holt's voice was flat, rehearsed. "The evaluations are conducted by certified military veterinary behaviorists. The results are documented and reviewed. These dogs were deemed unsuitable for continued service due to aggression, anxiety, or physical degradation." "That's a lie!" The words landed on Holt's table like a grenade. 2 nearby officers turned. The petty officer with the clipboard froze mid-step. Holt's eyes went cold. "Excuse me?" "I said that's a lie. Titan doesn't have an aggressive bone in his body. Ranger is the calmest detection dog I've ever worked with. And Valor..." Ethan leaned forward. "Valor was evaluated 6 months after Marcus died and cleared for continued service. I saw the report myself. So either someone falsified the assessments, or you're lying to my face." "You're out of line, petty officer." "I'm out of line?" Ethan's voice rose, and every dog in the facility reacted, barking, whining, pressing against their kennels. You've got 12 decorated military working dogs locked in boxes about to be sold to dogfighters and backyard breeders, and I'm out of line? These dogs are government property, undergoing lawful disposition. They're not property. They're soldiers. They serve this country longer and more faithfully than half the officers on this base, and you're selling them like used furniture. Holt stood up. His face had gone the particular shade of red that bureaucrats turn when their authority is challenged in public. If you have concerns about the disposition process, you can file a formal complaint through the proper channels. In the meantime, the event will proceed as scheduled. The hell it will! The bidding begins in 10 minutes, Petty Officer. Either register as a buyer or leave the premises. Ethan looked at Holt, looked at the kennels, looked at Valor, who had pressed his nose through the bars again and was watching Ethan with those hollow, desperate eyes. Marcus's last words, over the radio, through static and gunfire and the sound of a world ending. Get my dog home, brother. Promise me. Ethan had promised. Fine. Ethan's voice dropped. Quiet, level. The voice he used in the field when everything depended on the next 3 seconds. Start your bidding. Holt blinked, confused by the sudden compliance. 10 minutes later, the auctioneer, a civilian contractor with a microphone and the enthusiasm of a man selling livestock, stepped onto a small platform and cleared his throat. All right, folks, welcome to the Fort Sailor Surplus Working Dog Disposition Event. We have 12 animals available today. All sales are final. Medical records are sealed per military protocol. Buyers assume full responsibility. I have a question. Ethan's voice cut through the crowd like a rifle shot. The auctioneer paused. Questions at the end, sir. No, now. Ethan stepped forward. Diesel walked beside him, hackles up, that low growl building in his chest. Why are the medical records sealed? Military protocol. There is no protocol that seals medical records during a disposition event. Buyers have a legal right to see the health history of any animal they're purchasing. So I'll ask again. Why are they sealed? The auctioneer looked at Holt. Holt shook his head slightly, a signal that said, shut this down. Sir, if you'd like to discuss this privately, I'd like to discuss it right here, in front of everyone. Ethan turned to the crowd. 40 faces staring back. Some curious, some uncomfortable, some just wanting to buy a dog and go home. These dogs served in Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, and Yemen. They detected explosives. They tracked terrorists. They shielded American service members with their own bodies. Some of them carry shrapnel in their hips. Some of them have hearing loss from flashbangs. Some of them watch their handlers die. Silence. Total silence. Even the dogs had gone still. And now they're being sold to the highest bidder, without medical records, without transparency, and without any effort to return them to their handlers or place them in legitimate retirement programs. Ethan paused. Does anyone want to ask why? The crowd shifted. Whispers rippled. The man in the leather vest who'd been checking teeth suddenly looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. That's enough, Holt stepped forward. Petty Officer Cole, you are disrupting a lawful military process. Stand down, or I will have you escorted off. Who wants to start the bidding? The auctioneer tried, voice cracking. Stop. One word. Ethan's voice wasn't loud. It was something worse than loud. It was the voice of a man who had given commands in rooms where the wrong word got people killed, and every person in that yard felt it in their spine. Stop the auction. The auctioneer's hand froze above his clipboard. I will take all of them. Nobody moved. All 12 dogs. Every single one. Name your price. The auctioneer stared. Holt stared. The entire crowd stared. That's not how this works, the auctioneer stammered. Individual animals are bid on individually. Then I'll bid on every one individually, starting now. Whatever the highest bid is, I'll double it. For all 12. You can't afford... Try me. Holt stepped between Ethan and the platform. His face had passed through red and arrived at something paler, something closer to fear. This is irregular. The disposition protocol requires individual placement assessments. The disposition protocol also requires transparent medical records and handler notification before retirement. You skipped both. Ethan held Holt's gaze. So let's not talk about protocol. I'm denying your request. On what grounds? On the grounds that I am the commanding officer of this facility, and I said no. Every dog in the yard started barking. Not random panic noise. Coordinated. As if they understood. As if they were voting. Titan threw his weight against the kennel bars. Ranger stood up for the first time all day and pressed forward. Blitz stopped his frantic pacing and added his voice. A deep, desperate bark that echoed off every surface. And Valor, who had barely moved in hours, lifted his head and howled. The sound cut through the yard like a blade, long, anguished, ancient. The howl of a dog who had lost everything and was watching his last chance walk away. The crowd felt it. Every single person felt it. The woman with a clipboard lowered it. The man in the leather vest stepped back from the kennels. Even the auctioneer set down his microphone. You hear that? Ethan said to Holt. Quiet. Deadly. That's not barking. That's a plea. Every one of those dogs is begging you to do the right thing. And you're going to stand there and tell me no? Holt swallowed. His eyes darted to the crowd. Phones were out, recording. This was no longer a quiet disposal event. This was a public stage. I'll file an official acquisition request, Ethan said, through proper channels. But until that request is processed, this auction does not proceed. And if a single one of these dogs is sold, transferred, or harmed before my request is reviewed, I will personally ensure that every news outlet, every congressional office, and every veterans organization in this country knows exactly what happened here today. Holt stared at him for a long time. The kind of stare that calculates costs and consequences and decides how much a career is worth versus how much a fight will cost. You're making a mistake, petty officer. No, sir, I'm keeping a promise. Holt turned and walked away without another word. The auctioneer looked around, confused, waiting for instructions that didn't come. The crowd buzzed with whispers. Ethan walked back to Valor's kennel and knelt down. The dog pressed his nose through the bars and touched Ethan's hand, and the trembling in Valor's body eased, just slightly, just enough, as if the dog understood that something had shifted, that someone had finally shown up. I'm going to get you out of here, Ethan whispered. All of you. I promise. Diesel settled beside him. 2 dogs, one on each side of the bars. One free, one caged, and between them, a man who had just declared war on the system that had betrayed them all. Ethan's phone buzzed. Unknown number again. But this time, not a text, a call. He answered. Petty Officer Cole? A woman's voice. Professional. Controlled. But underneath the control, something urgent. My name is Dr. Nora Sinclair. I'm a military veterinarian. I was assigned to the MWD program at Fort Saylor until 3 months ago, when I was transferred to a desk position at Norfolk for, quote, administrative restructuring. Why are you calling me? Because I just watched what you did on a live stream someone is broadcasting from the disposition event, and I need you to know something. I'm listening. Those dogs didn't fail their behavioral assessments. I wrote those evaluations. Every single one of those dogs passed. Someone changed the results after I was reassigned. Ethan's grip tightened on the phone. Who? I can't say for certain, but I can tell you that my transfer happened 2 weeks after I refused to sign off on a bulk retirement order for 23 dogs. An order that came directly from Lieutenant Commander Holt's office. 23? There are only 12 here. Exactly. Dr. Sinclair's voice dropped. Which means 11 dogs are already gone. Sold, transferred, disappeared into a system that wasn't designed to track them. Ethan closed his eyes. 11 dogs. Gone. Into dogfights, into breeding mills, into the hands of people who saw weapons instead of warriors. There's more, Dr. Sinclair said. I kept copies of the original evaluations, and I have documents that show Holt has been working with a private defense contractor called Aegis Global. They've signed a $40 million contract to supply replacement dogs to the military. But the contract only works if the current dogs are removed from service. They're forcing dogs out to make room for a private company's product, and getting paid to do it. Holt receives a consulting fee from Aegis Global. It's buried in the paperwork, but it's there. She paused. I have everything on a flash drive, original evaluations, financial records, communications between Holt and Aegis Global's CEO. But I need someone who's willing to use it, because the last person I tried to give this information to was transferred to a base in Guam within 48 hours. Where can we meet? There's a veterans coffee shop off Route 17, the Grindhouse. I can be there in 2 hours. I'll be there in 90 minutes. Ethan hung up and looked at Diesel. The dog was watching him with those amber eyes, calm, steady, ready for whatever came next. The way he'd been for 5 years, the way he always would be. This just got a lot bigger than 12 dogs, buddy. Diesel's ears swiveled forward. His tail gave one slow wag. Not excitement, acknowledgement. The way a combat dog says, I'm with you, whatever it is, wherever it goes. Ethan stood up, took one last look at Valor, at the hollow eyes, the protruding ribs, the matted fur of a dog that had once been the proudest, fiercest shepherd in SEAL Team 7. Marcus's dog. Marcus's partner. The last living connection to a man who had died saving everyone except himself. Get my dog home, brother. I will, Marcus, Ethan whispered. I swear to God, I will. He walked toward the gate. Behind him, 12 dogs watched him leave. Their barking had stopped. Their crying had stopped. They just watched, silent, still, with something new in their eyes that hadn't been there an hour ago. Hope. The fragile, terrified, desperate kind. The kind that hurts worse than despair because it means you've started believing again, and believing means you have something left to lose. Ethan pushed through the gate and climbed into his truck. Diesel jumped into the passenger seat and pressed his nose against the window, looking back at the facility, at the dogs, still watching from their kennels. We're coming back for them, Ethan said. Every single one. He started the engine and pulled onto the highway. The flash drive was waiting. Dr. Sinclair was waiting. And somewhere inside a $40 million contract signed in blood and silence, the truth about what happened to those dogs, and what happened to Marcus Webb, was waiting to be dragged into the light. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the flash drive wouldn't just expose a corrupt officer selling dogs for profit. It would expose something far darker, something that would rewrite everything he believed about his best friend's death. And once he saw it, there would be no going back. Diesel settled into the seat and rested his head on Ethan's thigh, the way he always did on long drives. The way Marcus used to describe Valor doing on the way back from missions. He just puts his head on my leg, man, like he's saying, good job, we survived another one. Marcus should have survived that last one too. Ethan gripped the steering wheel and drove. Dr. Nora Sinclair was already sitting in the back booth when Ethan walked in. She was younger than he'd expected. Mid-30s, lean, with the kind of sharp eyes that came from years of looking at things other people missed. Her hands were wrapped around a coffee cup she hadn't touched, and she was watching the door with the controlled alertness of someone who'd been checking over her shoulder for weeks. Diesel patted in beside Ethan. The coffee shop owner, a retired Marine with a dog's welcome sign that had clearly been written by hand, nodded without comment. This was a veteran's place. Dogs were family here. Dr. Sinclair? Sit down. She didn't waste time with pleasantries. And call me Nora. If we're going to do this, we don't have time for formalities. Ethan slid into the booth. Diesel settled under the table, nose pointed toward the door. Old habit. Nora reached into her bag and placed a flash drive on the table between them. Small, black, unremarkable. The kind of thing you could lose in a coat pocket and never think about again. Everything is on there, she said. Original behavioral evaluations for all 23 dogs that were flagged for forced retirement. My assessments show every single one of them passed. Clean, no aggression, no behavioral degradation, no medical disqualifiers. And after you were transferred? Someone logged into the evaluation system using my credentials and changed the scores. 14 dogs went from fit for continued service to recommended for disposition in a single afternoon. Nora's jaw tightened. They used my name, my login, my professional reputation. If those falsified reports ever go to court, it looks like I'm the one who failed them. That's why they transferred you. Not to shut you up. To frame you. Took me 3 weeks to figure that out. She pushed the flash drive closer. But I'm not the only one with evidence. There's a handler, Sophie Delaney, former petty officer second class. She was discharged 8 months ago after filing a formal complaint about the treatment of retired MWDs at Fort Saylor. Discharged for filing a complaint? Officially, she was discharged for failure to meet administrative requirements. Unofficially, she asked too many questions about where the retired dogs were going, and Holt decided she was a problem. Nora paused. She's been tracking the Aegis Global Connection on her own ever since. Working at a civilian animal shelter, quietly pulling dogs out of the system when she can. Where is she? Bayside Animal Rescue, about 40 minutes from here. Nora slid a piece of paper across the table. She's expecting you. I called her while you were driving. Ethan pocketed the address and picked up the flash drive. What about the 11 dogs that are already gone? The ones that were sold before today? Nora's face changed. The professional composure cracked, and underneath it was something raw. 3 of them were sold to a private security company in Texas that uses former military dogs as guard animals. No veterinary oversight, no welfare checks. 2 were sold to a breeding operation in Georgia. Puppy mills, basically, using military bloodlines as a marketing tool. And the other 6? Nora didn't answer immediately. She looked down at her coffee, looked back up. Her eyes were wet. I don't know. The records were deleted. Whoever bought them paid cash, used false names, and the transaction files were wiped from the system within 24 hours. She swallowed. But I've heard rumors. Dogfighting circuits in the Midwest have been advertising military-trained animals for the past 4 months. Dogs that are already conditioned for high-stress environments. Dogs that won't back down. Ethan felt something inside him go very cold. The kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature. It comes from understanding the full scope of what you're facing and realizing it's worse than you imagined. They're selling combat dogs to fight rings. They're selling heroes to be tortured for entertainment. Nora's voice broke on the last word. I spent 6 years as a military veterinarian. I put my hands on those dogs every day. I healed them. I cleared them for missions that could kill them, and now they're... She stopped, pressed her fingers against her eyes. I'm sorry. Don't be sorry. Be angry. Ethan leaned forward. Who is behind Aegis Global? A man named Victor Rains, former defense contractor. Made his fortune selling equipment to the military during the Iraq surge. Body armor, vehicle upgrades, communication systems. When those contracts dried up, he pivoted to military working dogs. Cheaper to produce, easier to sell, and the demand never goes away. And Holt? Holt is Rains's inside man. He controls the disposition process. He decides which dogs get retired, when they get retired, and where they go. In exchange, Aegis Global pays him a consulting fee, $200,000 a year, routed through a shell company called Patriot Canine Solutions. $200,000 to sell out dogs that saved American lives? That's the price, apparently. Nora's voice hardened. But it gets worse. How does it get worse? Because Aegis Global doesn't just supply replacement dogs. They also supply intelligence packages for special operations. Field intelligence, targeting data, mission planning support. She paused. Including the intelligence package used for Operation Sandstorm in Yemen 18 months ago. Ethan's blood turned to ice. Marcus's mission. Marcus Webb's team received targeting data from Aegis Global through a classified intelligence sharing agreement. The data identified a compound in the Marib Governorate as a high-value target location. Entry points, guard positions, structural layouts, all provided by Aegis Global's field team. That intel was wrong. Ethan's voice came out flat, mechanical, the way it did when he was processing information that his emotions couldn't afford to touch yet. The entry point was compromised. The compound layout was inaccurate. Marcus's team went through a door that should have been clear and walked into a kill zone. I know. Marcus took the blast, an IED inside the doorframe. He shielded Valor with his body. Ethan's hands were flat on the table, perfectly still, but his knuckles were white. He died on the medevac. His last words were about his dog. Ethan, you're telling me the intelligence that killed my best friend came from the same company that's now selling his dog? Nora didn't flinch. I'm telling you that Aegis Global has a pattern. Bad intel that gets people killed. Dogs that get discarded when they're no longer profitable. And a system of corruption that reaches from a desk officer at Fort Sailor all the way to defense contracts worth tens of millions. She held his gaze. But I can't prove the intel was deliberately compromised. Not yet. That's why I need help. Diesel whined under the table. He could feel the change in Ethan's body. The tension, the controlled rage, the particular stillness that came before action. The dog pressed harder against Ethan's leg, grounding him the way he'd done 1,000 times in the field. Who else knows about this? Ethan asked. A handler named Sophie Delaney. She's been tracking Aegis Global for a year. And a senior dog handler at Fort Sailor, Sergeant First Class Tom Braddock. He trained half the dogs on the disposition list. He knows they didn't fail their evaluations because he administered the field assessments himself. Why hasn't he said anything? Because Holt threatened his pension. Braddock has 18 months until retirement. 20 years of service, a wife and 2 kids. Holt told him that if he talked, his retirement benefits would disappear. So he watched them take the dogs and said nothing. He watched because he was afraid. Nora's voice softened slightly. Not everyone has the luxury of being fearless, Ethan. I'm not fearless. I'm furious. There's a difference. His phone buzzed. Unknown number. He almost ignored it. Then something in his gut told him to answer. Petty Officer Cole. A man's voice. Smooth. Polished. The voice of someone who hired people to do his talking and only picked up the phone when he wanted to make a point. My name is Victor Rains. I'm the CEO of Aegis Global Defense Solutions. Ethan looked at Nora, mouthed the name. Her face went white. How did you get this number? I get every number I need, Petty Officer. It's one of the benefits of working closely with the Department of Defense. Rains chuckled, the laugh of a man who found his own power amusing. I understand you made quite a scene at Fort Sailor today. I found 12 military working dogs being sold off like scrap metal. I'd call that more than a scene. You'd call it whatever serves your narrative. I'd call it a lawful disposition process being disrupted by an emotional veteran who can't distinguish between policy and personal feelings. My personal feelings are that those dogs serve this country with more honor than you've ever had in your entire life. So skip the corporate talk and tell me why you're calling. Silence. 3 seconds. The kind of silence that meant recalculation. I'm calling because I respect what you did in the field, Petty Officer. Your service record is impressive. 4 deployments, Silver Star, Purple Heart. A man like you has options. A future. Rains paused. I'd hate to see you throw that away over a misunderstanding about some old dogs. A misunderstanding? Budget decisions are made every day in the military. Units are retired. Equipment is replaced. It's the natural cycle of defense operations. These dogs served well, and now they're being transitioned to civilian life. There's nothing sinister about it. Then why were the behavioral assessments falsified? Another silence. Longer this time. I'm not aware of any falsified assessments. Dr. Nora Sinclair wrote clean evaluations for every dog on that disposition list. Someone changed them, using her credentials after she was forcibly transferred. I have the originals. Rains didn't respond for 5 seconds. When he did, the smooth polish was gone. What was underneath was harder, colder. Let me be direct with you, Petty Officer. You have a dog, a nice retirement, a clean record. Walk away from this, and all of that stays intact. I'll even make sure the dogs at Fort Sailor are placed in reputable homes. Every single one. Including Valor? Including whoever you want. Valor was my best friend's dog, Marcus Webb, SEAL Team 7. He died in Yemen 18 months ago using intelligence provided by your company. Ethan let the words land. So when you tell me to walk away, you're asking me to abandon the dog that my dead brother asked me to protect. Are you understanding the math here? I understand that grief makes people irrational. And I understand that $40 million makes people criminal. Ethan stood up. Diesel stood with him. Here's what's going to happen, Mr. Rains. I'm going to get those dogs out of Fort Sailor. I'm going to find the 11 that were already sold, and I'm going to make sure that every document, every falsified evaluation, every payment you've made to Lieutenant Commander Holt ends up on the desk of someone who will use it to put you in a cell. You're making an enemy you can't afford. I've had enemies with RPGs and night vision. You're a businessman with a phone. I'll take my chances. Ethan hung up. Nora was staring at him. He called you directly. He's scared. Ethan pocketed the phone. Same reason corrupt people always call directly. They want to assess the threat. Figure out if you can be bought or intimidated. Can you? My best friend died because of his company's intel. His dog is starving in a kennel because of his contract. There isn't a number big enough. Nora nodded. Something in her expression shifted, from cautious ally to committed partner. Then let's go see Sophie. She has things you need to see. They drove to Bayside Animal Rescue in Ethan's truck. Diesel rode shotgun, nose out the window, ears catching the wind with a pure, uncomplicated joy that only dogs are capable of, even in the middle of a crisis. Sophie Delaney was waiting outside the shelter when they pulled up. She was 26, short dark hair, strong hands. the kind of posture that said military, even in civilian clothes. Shoulders back, chin up, eyes scanning. She wore a shelter volunteer shirt that was too big for her, and jeans that had dog hair on them. And she looked at Ethan's NWU Type 3 uniform, the way veterans look at the uniform when they've been forced to take it off before they were Revy. "You're the SEAL from the video," she said. Not a question. "What video?" "Someone at the disposition event live-streamed the whole thing. You telling Holt to stop the auction. The dogs barking behind you. You saying you'd take all of them." Sophie held up her phone. "It's got 200,000 views in 3 hours. Ethan hadn't known, hadn't cared. But the number registered. 200,000 people had watched him stand in front of those kennels and make a promise. Now he had to keep it in front of an audience. "Nora said you've been tracking Aegis Global?" "For 14 months. Sophie led them inside the shelter. Dogs barked from kennels along the hallway. Civilian rescues, strays, surrenders. But in a separate room in the back, behind a locked door, 3 German shepherds lay on padded beds. Ethan recognized them immediately. These are MWDs. Atlas, Coda, and Fury. Sophie knelt beside the nearest dog, a shepherd with a graying muzzle and a scar across his shoulder. Atlas was sold at a disposition event 6 months ago. The buyer claimed to be a private security contractor. Turned out to be a front for a dogfighting operation in Virginia. I tracked him down through a rescue network and pulled him out. "How?" "I bought him." Sophie's jaw tightened. $500. That's what a decorated military working dog costs on the secondary market. $500 for an animal that spent 8 years protecting American soldiers. And the other 2? Coda was found wandering a highway in North Carolina. No chip, no tags. Someone had removed them. Fury was surrendered to a rural shelter in Tennessee by a man who said the dog was too much trouble. The shelter called me because I put out alerts through the rescue network. Sophie stood up. 3 dogs I managed to save, out of 11 that disappeared. 8 still missing. 8 that I can't find. 8 that might already be dead. Sophie's voice was steady, but her eyes weren't. And now there are 12 more at Fort Sailor about to go through the same pipeline, unless we stop it. Ethan looked at the 3 dogs on the padded beds. Looked at Diesel, who had walked up to Atlas and was touching noses with the old shepherd, the same way he'd touched noses with Titan through the kennel bars. The language of dogs recognizing their own. "I need everything you have," Ethan said. "Documents, photos, testimony, communication records. Everything." Sophie went to a filing cabinet and pulled out a box. Thick. Heavy. The kind of box that represented 14 months of obsession and rage organized into paper. Financial records linking Holt to Aegis Global. Photographs of dogs I traced after disposition events. Sworn statements from 3 handlers whose dogs were taken without proper notification. She placed it on the table. And this, she pulled out a folder. Inside were photographs, not of dogs, of a building, an Aegis Global facility outside of Norfolk. This is where they keep the replacement dogs before delivery. Younger animals, bred in private kennels, fast-tracked through basic training. Sophie pointed to one photograph. 3 weeks ago, I got close enough to see inside. The dogs are kept in conditions that violate every animal welfare standard the military has. Overcrowded, underfed, some with untreated injuries from training methods that any legitimate program would consider abuse. They're selling the military damaged dogs to replace healthy ones they forced into retirement. At $40 million. Sophie's eyes burned. And nobody knows because nobody's looking. The military gets new dogs. Aegis Global gets paid. Holt gets his cut. And the dogs that actually served, the ones that bled and sacrificed, they disappear. Ethan's phone rang. He checked the number. Not unknown this time. A number he recognized. Tom Braddock. Cole. Braddock's voice was low, strained. The voice of a man calling from a closet or a bathroom, or anywhere he thought he couldn't be overheard. I heard what you did at the disposition event. I need to talk to you. I need to talk to you too, Tom. Not on the phone. Meet me at my house tonight. 2100. And Cole, don't bring anyone military. I'm being watched. By who? Holt's people. Base security. Maybe worse. Braddock's voice dropped even lower. They came to my office an hour after you left Fort Sailor. Told me that if anyone asks about the evaluations, I say they were conducted properly. Told me that if I deviate from that statement, I'll be investigated for misconduct and my retirement will be revoked. They're threatening you. They're threatening my family, my wife, my kids. They said it just like that. Think about your family, Sergeant. Like it was a suggestion. Braddock's breathing was ragged. I've kept my mouth shut for 6 months. Watched them take dogs I trained, dogs I loved. Watched them change my evaluations and put my name on lies. I've hated myself every single day for it. Then help me fix it. That's why I'm calling. A pause. Ethan heard Braddock swallow hard. I have something. Something I took from Holt's office 3 months ago. Something he doesn't know I have. What is it? A communication log. Encrypted emails between Holt and Rains dating back 2 years. I couldn't read most of them. They're coded. But there's one chain that isn't. One chain where they discuss Operation Sandstorm. Where they discuss the intelligence package they provided for the Yemen raid. Ethan stopped breathing. Tom, what does it say? It says they knew the intel was compromised. They knew the entry point was wrong. They knew the compound layout had changed 3 days before the operation. Braddock's voice cracked. And they sent your team in anyway? Because pulling the intel package would have triggered a review that would have exposed the entire dog replacement scheme. The room went silent. Sophie and Nora were both watching Ethan's face, and whatever they saw made them go perfectly still. They knew, Ethan said. The words came out quiet, almost inaudible. They knew Marcus was walking into a trap. Cole, I'm sorry. They killed him. Ethan's voice didn't rise. It dropped into the register, where words stop being communication and start being weapons. They didn't just let him die. They sent him in knowing he wouldn't come out. They murdered a Navy SEAL to protect a contract. That's what the emails say. And Valor. Marcus shielded Valor from the blast, saved the dog's life with his own body. And then they took that dog and put him in a cage and tried to sell him. Ethan's hand was gripping the phone so hard the screen cracked along one edge. Marcus died for his dog, and they sold his dog for scrap. I know. That's why I can't stay quiet anymore. I don't care about my pension. I don't care about my career. What they did to those dogs. What they did to Webb. Braddock's voice steadied. I'll testify. Whatever you need. Wherever you need me. I'm done being afraid. 2100. Your house. I'll be there. Cole, be careful. If Rains finds out what I have, he won't just threaten. The man has private security. Ex-military, the kind of people who make problems disappear. I've been a problem my whole career, Tom. Nobody's made me disappear yet. He hung up. Nora and Sophie were both staring at him. Diesel was pressed against his leg, whining softly, feeling the earthquake inside his handler's body. Ethan. Nora's voice was careful. What did Braddock say? Ethan looked at her. Looked at Sophie. Looked at the 3 rescued dogs lying on their beds, trusting the humans around them because that's what dogs do. They trust, even when every experience tells them they shouldn't. Marcus Webb didn't die in combat. Each word fell like a stone into still water. He was murdered. Aegis Global knew the intel was compromised. They sent his team into a kill zone because pulling the intelligence package would have exposed their corruption. Sophie's hand went to her mouth. Nora closed her eyes. My best friend was assassinated to protect a $40 million dog contract. Ethan's voice was steady now. Not calm. The opposite of calm. The kind of steady that happens when fury burns so hot it turns everything else to ash, and what's left is pure, crystallized purpose. And the dog he died to save is sitting in a kennel at Fort Sailor with his ribs showing, waiting to be sold to a stranger. What do you want to do? Sophie asked. I want to burn them down. Holt, Rains, every person who signed off on this. Every person who knew and said nothing. And the dogs? Ethan looked at Diesel. The dog looked back with amber eyes that held no judgment, no agenda, no calculation. Just loyalty. Pure, unbreakable. The kind that humans talk about, but dogs actually live. The dogs come first. They always come first. He picked up the flash drive from the table, picked up Sophie's box of evidence, picked up his phone, and started composing the message to a number he hadn't used in 3 years. A number belonging to Captain Diane Mercer, NCIS. The one person in the military justice system he trusted absolutely. I need both of you tonight, at Braddock's house, 2100. I'll be there, Nora said. Me too, Sophie said. Ethan nodded, looked down at Diesel. The dog's tail gave one slow, deliberate wag. Let's go get those emails, boy. And then let's go get our dogs. Diesel stood up, pressed his head against Ethan's hand, the way he did before every mission, the way he'd always done. The gesture that said, I don't know what's coming, but I know I'm going with you, and that's enough. Ethan walked out of the shelter with evidence in his hands and murder in his heart, and 12 dogs waiting in kennels for a man who had just learned that keeping his promise was going to cost more than he'd ever imagined. And he was going to pay it anyway. Every last cent. Braddock's hands were shaking when he opened the door. Not the kind of shaking that comes from cold or caffeine. The kind that comes from a man who has spent 6 months swallowing poison and has finally decided to spit it out, knowing it might kill him either way. Get inside, Braddock said. All of you. Fast. Ethan went first, Diesel next. Then Sophie and Nora, moving quickly, silently, the way people move when they understand the stakes have passed beyond careers and entered the territory of survival. Braddock locked the door, checked the window, pulled the blinds shut with the precise, mechanical movements of a man running on adrenaline and terror in equal measure. Where's your family? Ethan asked. Sent them to my sister's in Richmond this morning. Told my wife it was a surprise visit. Braddock's jaw worked. She doesn't know about any of this, about the dogs, about what Holt's been doing. I couldn't, his voice cracked. I couldn't tell her I've been a coward for 6 months. You're not a coward, Tom. You were protecting your family. I was protecting myself. Braddock met Ethan's eyes, and the self-loathing in them was so raw it made the air heavier. I watched them change the evaluations on my computer. Watched them reclassify dogs I'd trained for years as aggressive, as unfit, as surplus. Dogs that would have run through fire for me. And I sat there and let someone stamp defective on their records because I was afraid of losing my pension. You're here now, Sophie said quietly. That's what matters. Braddock stared at her for a long moment. Then he went to a closet in the hallway and pulled out a lockbox. Combination lock. His fingers fumbled twice before getting it open. Inside was a laptop. Old, military issue. The kind that looked like it had survived a deployment, because it had. 3 months ago, Holt left his office unlocked during a fire drill. 90 seconds, that's all I had. Braddock set the laptop on the kitchen table. I plugged in the USB and copied everything I could grab. Didn't even look at what I was getting, just copied and ran. And Holt doesn't know? If Holt knew, I'd be in a cell right now. Or worse. Braddock opened the laptop. Most of what I grabbed is encrypted. Financial records, personnel files, communication logs, all locked behind passwords I can't crack. But there's one folder that wasn't encrypted. One chain of emails that Holt either forgot to protect or didn't think anyone would ever see. He turned the screen toward Ethan. The email chain was between two addresses, one internal military, one private. The internal address belonged to Holt. The private address was registered to a domain called patriotcanine.net. Raines's shell company. Ethan read the first email, dated 14 months ago. Phase 2 proceeding. Retirement orders for Unit Group 7 processed. Behavioral modifications applied to evaluation records per our agreement. Dispositions scheduled for Q3. Revenue allocation as discussed. Revenue allocation. They were talking about living, breathing animals. Dogs that had served in combat. Like quarterly earnings. The second email, dated 11 months ago. Concerns raised by veterinary officer re-evaluation discrepancies. Recommend reassignment to non-critical post, Norfolk suggested. Handle quietly. That was Nora. Her career, her reputation, her life's work. Handle quietly, in 6 words. Then Ethan reached the third email chain, dated 20 months ago, 2 months before Marcus died. His hand stopped on the trackpad. Read it, Braddock said. You need to see all of it. The email from Raines to Holt. Intel package for Sandstorm compiled from secondary sources. Primary verification incomplete. Field team reports potential structural changes to target compound, but confirmation timeline exceeds operational window. Recommend proceeding with existing data. Delay risks exposure of program Vanguard. Holt's reply. Understood. Forwarding to JSOC is verified. Will flag as high confidence. Ethan read it again, and a third time, because his mind refused to accept what his eyes were showing him. High confidence, he said. The words tasted like ash. Holt flagged unverified intelligence as high confidence. He sent my team into a compound using targeting data that his own contractor admitted was incomplete. Because verifying the intel would have delayed the operation, Nora said, reading over his shoulder. And a delay would have triggered a review of the intelligence source, which would have exposed Program Vanguard, the dog replacement scheme. They chose a contract over Marcus's life. They chose money over all of your lives. Nora's voice was barely a whisper. Your entire team walked into that compound based on a lie. Ethan pushed back from the table, stood up, walked 3 steps toward the wall, and stopped because there was nowhere to go. Nowhere in the world he could walk to that would make this not be true. Marcus, laughing in the ready room before the mission brief. Checking Valor's harness with the obsessive care of a handler who loved his dog more than sleep. Saying, "Let's go get him, brother," the way he always did before they stepped off. Like it was a game. Like they were invincible. Like dying was something that happened to other people. Marcus hadn't died in combat. He'd been sacrificed on an accountant's spreadsheet. Diesel pressed against Ethan's leg, hard. The dog could feel the seismic shift happening inside his handler. The grief restructuring itself into something darker, something sharper, something that would either save them all or consume them. Ethan, Sophie's voice. Careful. The way you talk to someone standing on an edge. We can use this. This is the evidence that changes everything. But only if we move now, before Rains finds out what Braddock has. She's right, Nora said. These emails prove foreknowledge. Prove that Holt submitted falsified intelligence to a joint special operations command. That's not corruption. That's a war crime. Who do we take it to? Braddock asked. The chain of command is compromised. Holt has allies at Fort Sailor. The base commander signed off on the disposition events without questioning them. If we go through military channels, we don't go through military channels. Ethan turned around. His face had changed. The grief was still there, but it had been packed down beneath something harder, something operational. The face of a SEAL who had just identified his target. We go to NCIS. NCIS? Braddock looked skeptical. They're military law enforcement. If the chain of command is compromised, NCIS operates independently. They report to the Secretary of the Navy, not to base commanders or facility directors. And I know someone there. Ethan pulled out his phone. Captain Diane Mercer. She's been watching Aegis Global for 2 years. She told me once, over drinks at a retirement party, that she knew Rains was dirty, but could never get enough evidence to move. You trust her? With my life, which is exactly what I'm about to do. He dialed. 3 rings. Mercer? Captain, it's Ethan Cole. Cole. A pause. The particular pause of someone who hasn't heard a name in years, but recognizes it instantly. I saw the video from Fort Sailor. 2 million views now, by the way. You're trending on every veterans page on the internet. I don't care about views. I care about 12 dogs in kennels and a dead SEAL who deserves justice. Marcus Webb. You know about him? I know Aegis Global provided the intelligence for Operation Sandstorm. I know the intel was flagged as high confidence when it shouldn't have been. And I know that someone in the disposition chain at Fort Sailor has been working with Rains to force out military working dogs and replace them with Aegis Global's stock. Mercer's voice tightened. What I don't have is proof, hard documentation that connects the dots. I have it. Silence. The kind that means someone has stopped breathing. What do you have, Cole? Encrypted emails between Holt and Rains discussing the falsification of the Sandstorm intelligence package. Original behavioral evaluations proving the dogs didn't fail their assessments. Financial records linking Holt to a $200,000 annual payment through a shell company. Testimony from the senior handler who watched the evaluations being changed. And a military veterinarian who was forcibly transferred for refusing to sign fraudulent retirement orders. Mercer was quiet for 5 full seconds. Ethan could hear her thinking, weighing the evidence against the risk, calculating the operational requirements, deciding whether this was real or another dead end in a 2-year investigation that had produced nothing but frustration. Where are you? Off base. Secure location. Stay there. I'm mobilizing a team. We can be at Fort Sailor by dawn. Mercer paused. But Cole, I need something more. The emails and evaluations will support charges against Holt. Maybe even Rains. But to prove that the Sandstorm intel was deliberately compromised, to prove that Webb's death wasn't a tragic intelligence failure, but a calculated decision, I need someone on the inside to confirm the chain of custody. Braddock. Sergeant First Class Tom Braddock. He's with me now. He's willing to testify. Is he reliable? Ethan looked at Braddock. The man's hands had stopped shaking. Something had settled behind his eyes. The look of a man who had finally made the decision he should have made 6 months ago, and was ready to live with whatever it cost. He's terrified and he showed up anyway. In my experience, that's the most reliable kind of person there is. All right, I'm moving. 6 hours. Keep everyone safe until then. Mercer hesitated. And Cole. The dogs at Fort Sailor. If Holt gets wind of this investigation before we move, he'll have them transferred. Gone. You understand what that means. Destroyed. Or worse, sold into the same pipeline that already swallowed 11 others. Mercer's voice hardened. Can you secure them? I have a plan. Is it legal? Mostly. Cole, do you want those dogs alive when your team arrives? Or do you want them to be legally compliant and dead? 3 seconds of silence. Keep them alive. I'll deal with the paperwork. She hung up. Ethan looked at the 3 people in the room. Nora, the veterinarian who had refused to sign fraudulent orders and lost her career for it. Sophie, the handler who had been discharged for asking the wrong questions and had spent 14 months building a case on her own. Braddock, the trainer who had watched in silence for 6 months and was now standing up because a man with a dog had walked into an auction and reminded him what courage looked like. Here's what's going to happen, Ethan said. We have 6 hours before Mercer's team arrives at Fort Sailor. In that window, we need to extract 12 dogs from the disposition center before Holt can move them. Extract? Braddock's eyes widened. You want to break into a military facility and take... I want to enter a military facility using legitimate veterinary authorization and remove animals whose welfare is at immediate risk. Ethan looked at Nora. You're still a commissioned military veterinarian. Your credentials are still active. I was reassigned, not discharged. Technically, yes. My clinical authority extends to any military working dog in distress. Nora caught on fast. I can issue an emergency welfare hold. It's a medical directive that overrides disposition orders when an animal's health is in immediate danger. Will it hold up? Long enough. If anyone challenges it, the burden is on them to prove the dogs aren't in danger. And given the condition I saw them in from the live stream, Nora's mouth tightened. Malnourished, stressed, at least 2 showing signs of acute anxiety disorder. I can document enough to justify an emergency removal. Braddock, you have base access. Until 0600, when my regular shift starts. After that, my movements get logged. Then we go before 0600. Ethan turned to Sophie. I need your shelter as a temporary holding facility. 12 dogs, minimum 48 hours until NCIS can secure them as evidence. The shelter can handle it. I've been preparing for something like this since I started. Sophie paused. But Ethan, what about the 11 dogs that are already gone? Atlas, Coda, and Fury are safe at my shelter, but 8 are still missing. One problem at a time. Tonight, we save the 12 we can reach. Tomorrow, we find the 8 we can't. He looked at each of them. Anyone want to walk away? This is the last chance. After tonight, there's no going back. Nobody moved. Good. Ethan knelt beside Diesel. The dog looked up at him with those amber eyes, steady, unwavering, the eyes of a partner who had never once hesitated when it mattered. One more mission, buddy. Diesel's tail wagged once, slow, deliberate. The wag that meant always. They moved at 0300. Braddock drove them through the back gate of Fort Sailor using his security credentials. No alarms, no additional scrutiny. The guards barely glanced at the military vehicle. Just another late shift movement on a base that never fully slept. The disposition center was dark, locked. But Braddock had the access codes, the same codes he'd used every day for 20 years. The moment the door opened, the dogs reacted. Not with barking, not with the frantic, desperate cries from that afternoon. With something quieter, something that Ethan felt in his chest before he heard it. A collective exhalation. The sound of 12 animals who had been holding their breath since he'd walked away that morning, waiting, hoping, refusing to believe it was over. Diesel went in first, working the room the way he always did. Methodical, thorough, checking each kennel, touching noses through the bars. And behind him, each dog rose. Each dog pressed forward. Each dog said, with their eyes and their whines and the push of their noses against the metal, "You came back." You actually came back. Ethan went to Valor's kennel first. The dog was standing this time, thin, trembling, but standing. And when Ethan knelt in front of the bars, Valor pressed his entire body against the door with a force that made the metal sing. "I told you I was coming back." Ethan's voice was rough. "I don't break promises, buddy. Not to Marcus. Not to you." Nora moved through the facility with clinical precision, documenting each dog's condition on her tablet. Weight loss, stress indicators, dehydration, untreated pressure sores from lying on concrete. She photographed everything, evidence that would support both the emergency welfare hold and the criminal case. "These dogs haven't been properly fed in at least a week," Nora said, her voice tight with controlled fury. "Titan has lost 12 pounds since his last recorded weight. Blitz is showing signs of acute stress collapse. And Valor..." She stopped in front of his kennel. "Valor has a wound on his right hip that hasn't been treated. It's infected." "Shrapnel scar," Ethan said. "From Yemen. It was healing fine when he was with his handler. Someone stopped treating it. Someone stopped caring." Nora signed the emergency welfare directive on her tablet. 12 dogs. Immediate removal authorized under military veterinary code. My name, my credentials, my authority. Braddock unlocked the first kennel. Titan stepped out, cautious at first, then faster, pressing his massive body against Braddock's legs with a force that nearly knocked the man backward. "Easy, big guy." Braddock's voice broke. "I'm sorry. God, I'm so sorry." Titan didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. He pressed harder, forgiving everything with the simple pressure of his body against the man who had once been his trainer, his protector, his person. One by one, the kennels opened. Ranger stepped out and immediately went to Diesel, the two dogs circling each other in the ancient ritual of warriors recognizing equals. Blitz emerged, trembling, legs unsteady, and Sophie caught him, guided him gently, supported his weight, whispered calm words into his flattened ears until the shaking eased. Ethan opened Valor's kennel last. The dog didn't rush out. He stepped forward slowly, with the careful deliberation of an animal that had been tricked before and couldn't survive being tricked again. One paw, then another, until he was standing in front of Ethan, nose to knee, looking up with eyes that carried 18 months of grief. "Hey," Ethan knelt. "You're free, buddy. For real this time." Valor pressed his face into Ethan's chest, the same place Marcus used to hold him after missions. The same warmth. Different heartbeat, but close enough. Close enough to mean, I'm not alone anymore. Ethan wrapped his arms around the dog and held him. Felt the protruding ribs. Felt the trembling. Felt the infected wound on his hip that nobody had bothered to treat, because nobody had bothered to care. "I've got you," Ethan whispered. "Marcus sent me, and I'm not going anywhere." They loaded the dogs into the transport vehicle. 12 shepherds, plus Diesel, packed into a van that Braddock had signed out under a training exercise authorization. It was tight. It was chaotic. It was 13 military dogs and 4 humans in a space designed for maybe half that number. It was also the most beautiful thing Ethan had ever been part of. Sophie drove. Braddock rode shotgun. Nora sat in the back, monitoring the dogs, checking vitals, keeping the ones with anxiety close to the calm ones. Ethan sat on the floor of the van with Valor on one side and Diesel on the other. His 2 dogs, one he'd saved 2 years ago, and one he was saving tonight. bookending him like sentries guarding the most important thing they'd ever been asked to protect. They were 3 miles from the base gate when Braddock's phone rang. He answered, listened for 10 seconds. His face went gray. "That was my buddy in the security office. Holt just arrived at base. 3 in the morning, and he's walking into the disposition center." "He knows," Ethan said. "He'll find the kennels empty in about 4 minutes." "Then we have 4 minutes to get off this base." Ethan leaned forward. "Sophie, drive faster." She didn't need to be told twice. The van surged forward, engine whining, 13 dogs bracing against the sudden acceleration with the instinctive balance of animals who had ridden in military vehicles their entire lives. 2 minutes to the gate. Braddock's phone rang again. He looked at the screen, and his breath caught. "It's Holt." "Don't answer." "If I don't answer, he'll know I'm involved." "He already knows you're involved. The only question is whether we're through the gate before he locks it down." The gate appeared ahead. 1 guard, 1 barrier. Standard overnight security. Minimal staffing, minimal scrutiny. Sophie pulled up to the checkpoint, smiled at the guard, handed over Braddock's authorization form. The guard looked at the form, looked at the van, looked at the 13 dogs visible through the rear windows. "Training exercise?" He raised an eyebrow. "Late-night detection drill," Braddock said from the passenger seat. "New protocol. You know how it is." The guard studied the form for 3 more seconds. Behind them, in the distance, Ethan heard a sound that made his skin prickle. The wail of a base security siren, faint but growing. The guard heard it too, looked up, looked at Braddock, looked at the form. "Go ahead." He raised the barrier. Sophie floored it. The van shot through the gate and onto the highway, and behind them the siren grew louder. Lights began flashing across the base, and the sound of a system waking up to discover it had been beaten echoed into the dark. Ethan looked through the rear window, watched the base lights shrink in the distance, felt Valor pressed against his leg and Diesel pressed against his other leg, and 12 dogs breathing around him in a space that smelled like fear and freedom and the beginning of something that couldn't be stopped. His phone buzzed. A text from Holt. "You just ended your career, Cole. Every dog in that vehicle is stolen government property. You will be arrested, court-martialed, and prosecuted. And when I'm done, you will spend the rest of your life in Leavenworth." Ethan typed back 3 words. "Come and try." Then he called Mercer. "Captain, timeline just changed. We extracted the dogs. Holt knows. He'll try to report them as stolen. I need your team at Fort Saylor now, not dawn. Now." "You were supposed to wait." "The dogs would have been gone by dawn. Holt was already moving." 5 seconds of silence. Then Mercer's voice, hard and sharp. "I'm redirecting my team. 2 hours. Hold what you have and don't let anyone near those dogs. Not a soul." "And Cole, the emails from Braddock's laptop. Send them to me now, all of them. If Holt tries to frame this as theft, I need the evidence in my hands before his lawyers start spinning." "Sending now." "One more thing." Mercer's voice changed. Softer. The voice of a person behind the rank. "Marcus Webb's parents. They live in Virginia Beach. They've spent 18 months believing their son died because of bad luck and the fog of war." "I know. When this goes public, when they find out the truth, they deserve to hear it from someone who loved him, not from a news report." Ethan closed his eyes, felt Valor's warmth against his leg, felt the weight of a promise that kept getting heavier and more sacred with every hour that passed. "I'll tell them myself." "Good." Mercer paused. 2 hours, Cole. Keep those dogs alive." She hung up. Sophie drove through the darkness toward the shelter. Beside Ethan, Valor shifted and rested his head on Ethan's thigh. The exact gesture Marcus had described 100 times. The dog's way of saying, We made it. We survived another one. Ethan put his hand on Valor's head and felt the dog exhale. Long, slow. The breath of an animal releasing something it had been carrying for 18 months. "Almost there, buddy," Ethan whispered. "Almost home." 12 dogs in a van on a dark highway. 4 humans who had risked everything to save them. And behind them, an empire of corruption, waking up to discover that the man they'd tried to silence had just stolen their leverage, exposed their crime, and set a countdown that no amount of money or power or threats could stop. 2 hours until NCIS arrived. 2 hours until the truth that killed Marcus Webb became the weapon that would destroy the people who murdered him. And in the back of a crowded van, surrounded by warriors who walked on 4 legs, Ethan Cole held his best friend's dog and made one final promise. Not to Marcus, not to Mercer, not to anyone who could hear him. To himself. No more silence. No more looking away. No more letting systems built on greed decide which heroes live and which ones die. Not on his watch. Not ever again. Sophie backed the van into the shelter's loading bay at 0347. The dogs knew. Before anyone opened the doors, before anyone said a word, they knew. 12 noses pressed against the van's windows, 12 bodies shifted from tense to alert, and the collective energy inside the vehicle changed from fear to something Ethan could only describe as cautious recognition. The smell of other dogs, the smell of safety, the smell of a place that wasn't a cage. "Easy," Ethan murmured. "We're here. Everyone stays calm." He opened the rear doors and Diesel jumped out first. Always first, always clearing the ground for his handler, even when the ground was a parking lot at a civilian animal shelter, and the only threat was the raccoon that lived behind the dumpster. One by one, the dogs came out. Titan stepped down heavily, his massive frame still carrying the exhaustion of months of confinement. But his head was up, and his tail was moving. Not wagging, not yet, but moving. A dog deciding whether it was safe to feel something again. Ranger came next, nose working overtime, cataloging every new scent with the methodical precision of a detection dog who couldn't turn it off, even when the mission was over. Blitz had to be carried. Sophie lifted him out of the van and set him on his feet, and he stood there trembling until Titan pressed against his side, and the trembling eased. Valor was last. Ethan didn't rush him. He sat in the open doorway of the van and waited while Valor gathered whatever was left of his courage and forced his thin, weak body to move. The dog stepped down one paw at a time, nose testing the air, eyes scanning for threats that existed only in the memory of a shepherd who had learned the hard way that new places could mean new cages. "You're safe," Ethan said. "I promise." Valor pressed against his legs and stayed there. Sophie had prepared the shelter's back wing, the section reserved for long-term rehabilitation cases. 15 kennels with padded bedding, fresh water, food bowls already filled. She'd called in 2 volunteers she trusted absolutely. A retired Marine named Davis, who fostered rescue dogs, and a vet tech named Anya, who worked overnight shifts and never asked questions she didn't need answers to. 12 dogs? Davis looked at the procession filing through the back door and let out a low whistle. "Sophie, when you said you needed help tonight, I thought you meant with a litter of puppies. These are military working dogs. They've been forcibly retired and were about to be sold off at a disposition auction." Sophie guided Blitz to the nearest kennel. "They need food, water, and quiet. And they need to not exist on any records until NCIS arrives." Davis looked at Ethan. Looked at the NWU Type 3 uniform. Looked at the 13 German shepherds filing past him, with the disciplined calm of animals who had trained their entire lives to follow commands, even when the world was falling apart. "Copy that," Davis said. No further questions. A Marine knew when the mission was bigger than the briefing. Nora started triage immediately, checking each dog, documenting injuries, starting hydration protocols for the ones showing signs of dehydration. She moved through the kennels with the quiet efficiency of a doctor who had spent years learning to separate her emotions from her hands, even when both wanted to break. Titan needs joint supplements and rest. His hips are degraded from untreated strain. Ranger has a dental infection that's been festering for weeks. Blitz. She stopped in front of his kennel, and for the first time since Ethan had met her, Nora Sinclair's composure cracked all the way through. Blitz has stress-induced cardiomyopathy. His heart is enlarged. He's been in a state of sustained panic for so long that it's physically damaged his cardiac tissue. Can you treat it? I can stabilize him. But he needs a veterinary cardiologist and a calm environment and time. Her voice shook. He needs time he might not have, Ethan. Because someone left a dog with a damaged heart in a metal cage and forgot about him. They didn't forget. Ethan's voice was flat. They chose. His phone buzzed. Mercer. "Cole, my team is airborne. ETA Fort Sailor, 0600. But we have a complication." "What kind?" "Holt filed a theft report with base security 20 minutes ago. 12 military working dogs, stolen from the disposition center by Petty Officer First Class Ethan Cole and Sergeant First Class Thomas Braddock. He's named you both. He's named the dogs by service number. And he's requesting civilian law enforcement assistance to recover, his word, government property. He's trying to get the local police to find us before NCIS arrives." "That's exactly what he's doing. And legally, until my team serves the warrant and takes jurisdiction, a local police department that receives a theft report from a military installation has probable cause to search and seize." "How long until your warrant is active?" "My JAG officer is drafting it now. 2 hours, maybe 3. "We might not have 3 hours." "Then don't be where the police expect you to be." Mercer paused. "And Cole, protect the evidence, the laptop, the flash drive, the veterinary documentation. If Holt's lawyers can claim the evidence was obtained improperly or tampered with, they'll move to suppress everything." "Understood." "One more thing. Victor Rains. We've been monitoring his communications since you forwarded the emails. 30 minutes ago, he chartered a private jet from Norfolk International to Grand Cayman. He's running. We've flagged his passport. TSA is aware. But Rains has resources, private security, alternate documentation, contacts in 3 countries without extradition treaties." Mercer's voice hardened. "If he gets on that plane, we lose him." "Then don't let him get on the plane." "That's above my authority. I've escalated to the FBI. They're coordinating with Customs and Border Protection. But Cole, if Rains disappears, the murder charge dies with him. We can still get Holt for corruption and fraud, but the sandstorm evidence, the proof that Marcus was set up, that's all on Rains. He's the one who made the call. He's the one who sent the email." Ethan felt the ground shift under his feet. The entire case, Marcus's justice, the dog's freedom, everything they'd risked, balanced on whether a rich man with a private jet could be stopped before he reached international airspace. "Keep me updated. Every 30 minutes. Stay safe, Cole." She hung up. Braddock was pacing the shelter's back room, phone in his hand, face the color of old concrete. "My wife called. Someone went to my sister's house in Richmond. 2 men in suits. They told my sister they were from military personnel and needed to speak with me about a security matter." Braddock's voice was tight. "My wife is terrified. My kids are asking why strangers are at the door. Raines's people, Ethan said. Private security. They're trying to find you before you can testify. They found my family. Braddock stopped pacing. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by something older, something harder. The particular fury of a man whose children have been threatened. I spent 6 months being a coward to protect them, and they went after them anyway. Call your wife. Tell her to take the kids and go to a hotel. Different name, cash only. Don't use credit cards, don't call anyone she knows. Ethan gripped Braddock's shoulder. Your family will be safe. Mercer will have protection on them within the hour. And if she can't? Then I will. Ethan held his gaze. I lost my best friend because I couldn't protect him. I'm not losing anyone else. Not tonight. Braddock nodded, pulled out his phone, walked to the corner of the room, and called his wife. And Ethan heard the words come out. Baby, listen to me. Take the kids, leave now. I'll explain everything. In the voice of a man who had finally crossed the line from bystander to combatant, and was discovering that the other side was scarier and clearer and more alive than anything he'd felt in years. Sophie found Ethan in the kennel room, sitting on the floor between Valor and Diesel. Both dogs were pressed against him. Valor's breathing had evened out. Not calm exactly, but steadier. The steadiness of an animal that had found something solid to lean against. There's something you need to see. Sophie knelt beside him and held out her phone. The video from the disposition event. The one where you stopped the auction. It hit 10 million views an hour ago. Ethan took the phone, scrolled through the comments. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Someone give that man every dog in America. I'm a retired canine handler. I'm crying. Where are those dogs now? How do we help? This is what a real hero looks like. And then, deeper in the comments, something that made Ethan stop scrolling. I'm Marcus Webb's mother. My son died 18 months ago in Yemen. His dog Valor was supposed to be protected. If anyone knows where Valor is, please contact me. I've been trying to find him since Marcus died. No one at the military will return my calls. Ethan stared at the comment, read it again, a third time. Marcus's mother, searching for her dead son's dog, begging strangers on the internet for help because the military, the same military her son had died serving, wouldn't answer the phone. Ethan? Sophie saw his face change. What is it? He showed her the comment. She read it, covered her mouth. She doesn't know, Ethan said. She doesn't know where Valor is. She doesn't know what they've been doing. And she definitely doesn't know that her son was murdered. Are you going to tell her? I have to. The words came out heavy. Mercer said the parents deserved to hear it from someone who loved Marcus, not from a news report. He looked at Valor. And she needs to know her son's dog is alive, that I found him, that he's safe. When? After NCIS moves, after Holt is in custody, after the evidence is secured. Ethan paused. I owe her that conversation face to face, not over a phone, not in a comment section. Sophie sat down beside him, close enough that their shoulders touched. You're carrying a lot, Ethan. I've carried heavier. Have you? He thought about it, honestly thought about it, and the answer was no. In 14 years of combat, 14 years of firefights and IED blasts and midnight raids in places that God seemed to have forgotten, he had never carried anything as heavy as what he was carrying now. Because in combat, the enemy was clear. The mission was defined. The rules, however brutal, were understood. This was different. This was betrayal by the people who were supposed to be on his side. This was finding out that the worst night of his life, the night Marcus died, wasn't a tragedy, but a transaction. This was holding a dog that his best friend had died to save, and knowing that the people who killed Marcus had then tried to sell Marcus's dog for profit. Combat was heavy, but this was the kind of weight that crushed your soul, not just your body. Marcus used to talk about valor the way some guys talk about their kids. Ethan's voice was quiet. The voice people use in the dark when they're not sure they want to be heard. He'd show pictures on his phone, tell stories about training exercises where valor outsmarted the whole team. He used to say that valor was the only person in his life who never wanted anything from him, except to be there. Sounds like he really loved that dog. He loved that dog more than himself. That's not a figure of speech. When the IED went off, when Marcus had maybe 2 seconds to react, he threw himself on top of Valor, covered the dog with his body, took the blast in his back. Ethan's hand rested on Valor's head. He saved the dog and died. That was his choice. In 2 seconds, with the world exploding around him, he chose the dog. And now you're choosing the dog too. I'm choosing all of them. Because if Marcus were here, if he could see what they did to Valor, what they did to Titan and Ranger and Blitz and all the others, he would have burned the entire system to the ground with his bare hands. He'd be proud of you. He'd be furious that it took this long. Ethan's phone buzzed. Mercer. Earlier than expected. Cole, 2 updates. First, we got Rains. FBI intercepted him at the charter terminal. He had 3 passports, $200,000 in cash, and a hard drive that his lawyers are already trying to claim is protected by attorney-client privilege. Is it? Not when it contains evidence of a conspiracy to commit murder. The satisfaction in Mercer's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. He's in federal custody, not bail eligible. Flight risk. Good. Second update? My team just served the warrant at Fort Saylor. Holt's office is being secured as we speak. He was still there, sitting at his desk at 5 in the morning, on the phone with his lawyer, trying to get ahead of the theft report. Mercer paused. He's in handcuffs now. Ethan closed his eyes, felt the information settle into his body the way a long-awaited breath settles into tired lungs. Cole, you there? I'm here. Holt made a statement when we cuffed him. Said he was following orders. Said the disposition program was approved at levels above his pay grade. Said, and I'm quoting, "You're making a mistake. I'm the small fish. The people above me will bury this before it ever sees a courtroom." Is he right? About being a small fish? Maybe. About burying it? Mercer's voice went steel cold. Not a chance. I've waited 2 years for this. The evidence you and your team provided isn't just sufficient for prosecution. It's devastating. Financial records, falsified evaluations, communication logs proving foreknowledge of compromised intelligence, testimony from a senior handler, medical documentation from a military veterinarian. She paused. And the Sandstorm emails. The ones that prove Rains and Holt knowingly sent a SEAL team into a kill zone to protect a $40 million contract. What about the dogs, the ones that were already sold? The 11 that disappeared into the pipeline? We're working on it. 3 have been located at Sophie Delaney's shelter. Atlas, Coda, and Fury. 2 more were traced to the private security company in Texas. My team is coordinating with local authorities to seize them. Mercer hesitated. The remaining 6, we have leads. Financial records from Holt's office show cash transactions with buyers who used false names. We're running them now. Dogfighting rings. Probably. But we'll find them, Cole. Every last one. Alive? Mercer didn't answer immediately, and in that silence, Ethan heard everything she couldn't say. The probability calculations, the statistical likelihood of survival for combat-trained dogs sold into underground fighting circuits, the brutal mathematics of time versus cruelty. "We'll find them," she repeated. "That's the only promise I can make." "Then make it count." She hung up. Ethan looked at Sophie. "Holt's in custody. Raines, too. FBI got him at the airport." Sophie exhaled, a long, shuddering breath that carried 14 months of fear and fury and sleepless nights out of her body in one release. "It's real," she whispered. "It's actually happening." "It's happening." "I've been fighting this alone for over a year, filing complaints that nobody read, tracking documents that nobody cared about, pulling dogs out of the pipeline one at a time, knowing that for every one I saved, 10 more disappeared." Her eyes filled. "I started thinking I was crazy, that nobody would ever listen, that the system was too big and too broken and too corrupt for one person to change anything." "You weren't crazy. You were early." Ethan met her eyes. Everyone else just needed time to catch up. Braddock appeared in the doorway. His face had changed. The terror was still there, edged into the lines around his eyes, but underneath it was something new. Purpose. The look of a man who had made his decision and was no longer wasting energy on doubt. "My family is safe. Hotel in Fredericksburg. Cash. No trail." He took a breath. "Mercer's sending a security detail. They'll be there by noon." "Good." "There's something else." Braddock walked to Valor's kennel and knelt down. The dog lifted his head, studied Braddock with tired, wary eyes. "The last time I saw this dog, I was transferring him from the MWD facility to the disposition center, following Holt's orders. I put Valor in a transport crate, and I carried him to a truck, and I drove him to a kennel, and I locked the door." His voice broke. "He looked at me when I closed that kennel, looked right at me, and I knew in my gut that what I was doing was wrong, that this dog had served with more honor than anyone in that building, that his handler died protecting him, that I was putting a hero in a cage because a man in an office told me to, and I was too afraid to say no." Valor watched Braddock with unblinking eyes. "I'm sorry." Braddock's hand hovered near the kennel bars, not touching, not yet, as if he needed permission from the dog he'd failed. "I should have fought for you. I should have fought for all of you. And I didn't." Valor lifted his nose, sniffed Braddock's hand. Held there for 3 seconds, an eternity in dog time, and then pushed his nose through the bars and pressed it against Braddock's palm. Forgiveness. Simple. Total. The kind that only dogs are capable of, because they don't keep ledgers, and they don't hold grudges, and they don't calculate whether someone deserves a second chance. They just decide, in their own way, in their own time, that the person in front of them is trying, and trying is enough. Braddock's tears fell on the kennel floor, and he didn't wipe them away. "Thank you," he whispered. "I don't deserve it, but thank you." Nora came in with a medical update. "Blitz is stabilized. Heart rate is down. He ate. First time he's eaten willingly in what I'm guessing is days. Titan and Ranger are responding well to hydration. The other 8 are in various stages of recovery, but nothing life-threatening." She paused. "Valor needs surgery on that hip wound. Sooner rather than later. The infection is spreading." "Can you do it here?" "No. He needs a proper surgical suite. I've called a veterinary hospital in Virginia Beach. A friend of mine runs the trauma department. She can take him tomorrow." Tomorrow. Ethan looked at Valor. The dog was resting now, chin on his paws, eyes half closed. The first time Ethan had seen him relax since the disposition center. "He's waited 18 months. He can wait one more day." "Ethan," Sophie touched his arm. "Virginia Beach. That's where Marcus's parents live." The coincidence, or the providence, depending on what you believed, wasn't lost on him. taking Valor to the same city where Marcus's mother was searching for her son's dog, bringing the animal home to the family that had been looking for him since the day Marcus died. "Two birds," Ethan said quietly. "One trip." "Are you ready for that conversation?" "No." He looked at Valor. "But he is." Dawn broke over the shelter. Golden light pushed through the windows and found 12 dogs resting in clean kennels with full bellies and treated wounds, and the quiet, tentative beginning of trust in their eyes. Ethan stood in the center of the room and looked at them. Titan, the IED detector who had saved a platoon. Ranger, the explosives dog whose nose was a national treasure. Blitz, the pursuit dog with a damaged heart that still beat. Valor, the SEAL's partner who had lost his world and was learning to breathe again. And 8 others, each with a name, a service record, a story of sacrifice that nobody outside this room would ever fully understand. 15 dogs, if you counted Atlas, Coda, and Fury in the other wing. 15 military heroes who had been discarded by a system designed to use them up and throw them away. And somewhere out there, 8 more. Missing. Lost in a pipeline of cruelty that monetized their training and weaponized their loyalty. "We're going to find them," Ethan said. To himself, to the dogs, to Marcus. Every single one. His phone buzzed. A news alert. He looked at the screen. "Breaking. NCIS arrests Navy officer and defense contractor CEO in military working dog corruption scandal. Sources say the investigation also involves the death of a Navy SEAL in Yemen. Full story developing." Below the headline, the video. His video. The one from the disposition event. The one where he'd stood in front of 12 kennels and said 5 words that had started all of this. 22 million views. The world was watching now. And the world was about to learn what happens when you discard heroes, when you cage warriors, sell partners, and kill the men who love them. And the one person who promised to stop it refuses to look away. Ethan set the phone down, knelt between Diesel and Valor, put a hand on each dog's head. "We're not done yet, boys." He felt their warmth under his palms, felt their heartbeats, steady and true. "But we're close. We're so close." Valor's tail moved, once, twice. The ghost of a wag from a dog who was remembering, slowly, what it felt like to believe in something again. And that was enough. For now, that was everything. The drive to Virginia Beach took 3 hours. Ethan made it in silence. Valor rode in the back seat, not lying down this time, but sitting up, watching the highway scroll past with a quiet alertness of a dog who was starting to remember what it felt like to go somewhere instead of being taken somewhere. Diesel rode shotgun, nose occasionally pressing against the window, but mostly watching Ethan the way he always did on long drives, reading his handler's breathing, his posture, the micro-tensions in his jaw that told the dog everything words couldn't. Sophie had offered to come. Ethan had said no. "This one I do alone." "You don't have to do everything alone, Ethan." "I know, but Marcus's mother deserves to hear this from the man who was there. Not from a team, not from a group. From the guy who held her son's hand on the medevac and promised to bring his dog home." He'd paused. "She needs to look at one face and know it's telling the truth." Sophie had nodded, kissed his cheek, whispered, "Come back to us," in a way that meant more than geography. Now he was parked outside a small house on a quiet street, and his hands wouldn't move from the steering wheel. He breached compounds in Kandahar. He'd cleared kill houses in Mosul. He'd jumped from helicopters into pitch-black ocean water with 80 pounds of gear and a dog strapped to his chest. None of it was as hard as what he was about to do. "Okay," he said it to himself. Set it to Diesel. Set it to Valor, who had pressed his nose between the front seats and was watching Ethan with eyes that seemed to understand exactly where they were and exactly what was about to happen. Ethan opened the door, walked around the truck, opened the back door, and clipped Valor's leash. The dog stepped down carefully, favoring his right hip, the infected wound now bandaged and treated, but still tender. He stood on the sidewalk and lifted his nose and sniffed the air. And something happened that Ethan had not expected. Valor's tail started wagging. Not the ghost of a wag, not the tentative, fearful movement from the shelter. A real wag. Full, sweeping, the kind that moves a dog's entire back half. Valor pulled toward the house. Not frantically, not desperately, but with the determined purpose of a dog who recognized something. A scent. A memory. Home. "He knows," Ethan whispered. Valor pulled harder. Ethan let him lead. They were 10 feet from the front door when it opened. A woman in her early 60s stood in the doorway. Silver hair, tired eyes. The particular posture of a mother who had buried a child and was still learning how to stand up straight without him. She looked at Ethan, looked at the uniform, looked at Diesel. Then she looked at Valor. Her hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God." "Mrs. Webb?" Ethan's voice came out rough. "My name is Ethan Cole. I served with Marcus." But she wasn't looking at him. She was looking at Valor. And Valor was looking at her. And the dog was pulling so hard against the leash that Ethan's arm ached from holding him back. "Is that—" Her voice broke into pieces. "Is that Valor?" Ethan let go of the leash. Valor launched. 70 pounds of German Shepherd, thin, wounded, carrying 18 months of grief in every muscle, hit Patricia Webb like a wave and nearly knocked her off her feet. She staggered backward, caught herself on the doorframe, and dropped to her knees. And Valor buried his face in her neck and made the sound. That sound. The one Ethan had heard in the kennel. The one that wasn't a bark or a howl, but a cry. Except this time, it wasn't grief. It was reunion. Patricia Webb sobbed, wrapped her arms around the dog her son had loved more than anything in the world, and held on, like he was the last piece of Marcus still breathing. "Where have you been?" she whispered into Valor's fur. "I looked for you. I called everyone. Nobody would tell me where you were. Nobody—" "I know." Ethan knelt beside her. His own eyes were burning. "I know, ma'am, and I'm sorry. For all of it." "They told me he was transferred to another unit. They told me he was being taken care of." She pulled back and looked at Valor, at the protruding ribs, the dull coat, the bandaged hip. "This isn't taken care of." "No, ma'am, it's not." She looked at Ethan then, really looked, and he saw the question forming in her eyes. The question he'd driven 3 hours to answer. The question that was going to change everything she believed about her son's death. "Come inside," she said. "Tell me everything." He told her. All of it. Sitting at her kitchen table, with Valor pressed against her leg and Diesel pressed against his, Ethan told Patricia Webb about the disposition center and the falsified evaluations and the Aegis Global contract and the emails that proved her son's intelligence package was compromised, and the man who had made the decision to send Marcus's team into a kill zone to protect a $40 million deal. He didn't soften it, didn't dress it up, didn't try to cushion the blow with careful language or bureaucratic euphemisms. He told her the truth, the way Marcus would have told it, straight, honest, and unflinching. Patricia didn't speak for a long time after he finished. She sat in her kitchen with her dead son's dog at her feet, and a stranger's truth ringing in her ears. And she was silent in the way that people are silent when the ground they've been standing on for 18 months turns out to be made of lies. "He didn't die in combat," she said finally. Not a question. A statement she was testing against the walls of her own kitchen, hearing how it sounded, deciding if she could survive, living in a world where it was true. "He died protecting Valor." That part was real. The IED, the blast, Marcus shielding the dog, all of that happened exactly the way you were told. Ethan leaned forward. "But the reason he was in that room, the reason the entry point was wrong, the reason the compound layout was inaccurate, that was because the people who provided the intelligence knew it was compromised and sent them in anyway. To protect a business deal. Yes. A deal about dogs. A deal about replacing military working dogs with cheaper private sector animals. And the man behind it, Victor Rains, decided that verifying the intelligence would delay the operation, and a delay would trigger a review that would expose the entire scheme. So he sent the unverified package, and Holt, the Navy officer who controlled the disposition program, flagged it as high confidence. Patricia's hands were flat on the table, perfectly still. The stillness of a woman holding herself together through sheer willpower. Where are they now? Rains is in federal custody. FBI intercepted him trying to flee the country. Holt was arrested at Fort Sailor this morning by NCIS. Ethan paused. The investigation has been reclassified. Marcus's death is now being treated as a homicide. Something moved behind Patricia's eyes. Not relief. It was too early for relief. Too raw, too new. But something adjacent to it. The particular feeling that comes when truth, however devastating, finally replaces the lie you've been forced to live with. "Marcus called me the night before that mission." Her voice was barely a whisper now. "He always called. Every time, before every operation. He'd say the same thing. 'Don't worry, Mom. Valor's got my back.' And I'd say, 'You come home to me, Marcus Webb.' And he'd laugh and say, 'Yes, ma'am.'" Ethan couldn't speak. His throat was locked around something that no amount of military training could dissolve. "He didn't come home." Patricia looked at Valor. The dog looked back with those deep brown eyes. Eyes that had watched her son die. Eyes that had waited 18 months for someone to bring him back to this kitchen, this house, this woman. "But his dog did." "Yes, ma'am. His dog did. Because of you. Because of Marcus. He asked me to get Valor home." Those were his last words. Ethan's voice cracked. He let it. "I'm sorry it took so long." Patricia reached across the table and took Ethan's hands. Held them the way a mother holds the hands of a child who is hurting. And Ethan, a Navy SEAL who had survived 14 years of combat without breaking, felt something inside him come undone at the touch of Marcus's mother's hands. "My son chose his friends well." She squeezed his hands. "Don't you dare apologize for keeping your promise. You brought his dog home. You exposed the people who killed him. You did everything a brother could do. It's not enough. It's never enough. That's what grief is. The permanent feeling that you should have done more." Her eyes softened. "But you did what you could. And Marcus would tell you the same thing if he were sitting in that chair right now." Valor pressed his head against Patricia's knee. She rested her hand on his head, and the dog closed his eyes, and for the first time since Yemen, the last piece of Marcus Webb's life was exactly where it belonged. "I'd like to keep him," Patricia said, "if that's possible." "He's yours, ma'am. He always was." "Will you visit?" Ethan looked at Valor, at the dog who had carried Marcus's memory through 18 months of darkness and come out the other side, still capable of wagging his tail at the sound of a familiar voice. "As often as you'll have me." The trials came 3 months later. Ethan sat in the courtroom every day, front row. Diesel beside him, a special accommodation from the judge after Mercer submitted documentation that Diesel was a service animal and a material component of the investigation. The prosecution laid out their case with surgical precision. Nora testified about the falsified evaluations, calm, clinical, devastating in her accuracy. Sophie testified about the disposition pipeline, the dogs sold to fight rings, the ones that disappeared, the 14 months she'd spent tracking the corruption alone. Braddock testified about the emails, the cover-up, the threats to his family, the night he'd watched dogs he loved being reclassified as defective to make room for a private company's product. And Ethan testified about Marcus. He told the courtroom about Operation Sandstorm, about the intelligence package marked high confidence that should have been marked unverified, about the compound entry point that was wrong, about the IED in the doorframe, about Marcus shielding Valor with his body, about the medevac where Marcus Webb, 29 years old, SEAL Team 7, the best operator and the best friend Ethan had ever known, looked up at him through the blood and the smoke and said, "Get my dog home, brother." The courtroom was silent. The jury was silent. Even Holt's defense attorneys were silent, because some truths are so heavy that they crush everything around them into stillness. Victor Raines was convicted on all counts: conspiracy, fraud, falsification of military intelligence, and the charge that mattered most: accessory to the murder of a United States service member. 32 years, federal prison, no parole. Holt was convicted on 14 counts: corruption, fraud, falsification of military records, animal cruelty, conspiracy. 20 years. The Aegis Global contract was voided. The company was dissolved. Every asset was seized by the federal government, and Marcus Webb was posthumously awarded the Navy Cross, the second highest decoration for valor in the United States Navy. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism in the face of enemy action, and for the ultimate sacrifice in protection of his canine partner, demonstrating the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service." Ethan attended the ceremony at Arlington. Patricia Webb accepted the medal. Valor sat beside her, wearing a new collar with Marcus's old dog tags attached. Tags that Patricia had kept in a box by her bed for 18 months, waiting for the day she could put them where they belonged. "He's wearing his daddy's tags," Patricia whispered to Ethan, tears streaming down her face. "He knows." Ethan couldn't speak. He just nodded. The missing dogs came home in waves. The two in Texas were recovered first, seized from the private security company in a raid coordinated by NCIS and local animal enforcement. Both were underweight. Both had untreated injuries. Both responded to military commands the moment they heard them, snapping to attention like soldiers who had been waiting for someone to remember they existed. Then, over the following weeks, 3 more were traced through financial records and witness interviews. One was found in a basement in Ohio, another in a fenced yard in Alabama, the third in a warehouse in Missouri that law enforcement had been monitoring as part of a dogfighting investigation. Each recovery was a victory. Each dog that came back was a piece of the puzzle being restored. The final 3 were the hardest. The trail had gone cold. False names, cash transactions, deleted records. Sophie spent weeks working the rescue network, calling shelters, posting alerts, following rumors that led nowhere, and then, suddenly, somewhere. The last dog was found in a rural property in Kentucky. A German shepherd named Phantom, 9 years of service, 3 combat deployments, a detection dog who had saved more lives than anyone would ever be able to count. He was chained to a post in a yard, emaciated, dehydrated, his spirit so broken that the rescue team had to carry him to the vehicle because he no longer had the strength or the will to walk. Ethan was there when they brought Phantom in. He knelt in front of the dog and spoke to him in the quiet, steady voice that handlers use when they're talking to an animal that has forgotten what kindness sounds like. "Hey, buddy, you're safe now. You're going home." Phantom didn't respond, didn't lift his head, didn't wag his tail, just lay there, breathing, existing in the hollow space between alive and gone. Diesel walked up to Phantom and lay down beside him, pressed his body against the broken dog's side, and stayed there, not moving, not demanding, just present, for 4 hours, until Phantom finally, slowly, turned his head and touched his nose to Diesel's ear. "That's it," Ethan whispered. "That's the start." 6 months after the trials, Ethan stood on the porch of his grandmother's house, the coastal property he'd inherited, the land that Maria's family had held for generations, and watched 15 dogs run across the open field below. Titan led the pack, as always. His hips were better now. Supplements, physical therapy, and the simple medicine of open space had restored something the kennel had tried to steal. Ranger trotted beside him, nose working the ground, cataloging scents with the professional dedication of a dog who would never fully retire from the job that defined him. Blitz, whose damaged heart had been stabilized by Dr. Sinclair's treatment, and the veterinary cardiologist in Norfolk, moved slower than the others, but moved. Every step a defiance, every breath a victory. And Phantom, the last dog recovered, the one they'd almost lost. Phantom was rumming, slowly, uncertainly, with the tentative joy of an animal rediscovering that his legs still worked and the world still had grass and the sun still felt warm on his back. He ran behind the pack at first, then beside them, and when Titan circled back and bumped his shoulder, an invitation, a welcome, Phantom's tail moved for the first time since Kentucky. The property had been transformed. What was once an empty coastal homestead was now the Webb Cole Canine Foundation, named for Marcus and Ethan, funded by donations that had poured in after the trials made national news. 15 retired military working dogs lived on the land, receiving medical care, rehabilitation, and the peaceful life they had earned through years of service that most Americans would never fully understand. But the foundation did more than rescue dogs. Ethan had built a program, simple in concept, revolutionary in execution, that matched combat veterans suffering from PTSD with retired military dogs. The idea had come to him on a night when he couldn't sleep, sitting on the porch with Diesel, watching the stars and thinking about all the operators he'd served with who came home physically intact, but emotionally shattered. "Dogs saved us in combat," he told Sophie. "Why wouldn't they save us after?" The program launched with 6 veterans and 6 dogs. Within 3 months, the waiting list had grown to over 300 names. Within 6 months, the VA had reached out about a formal partnership. Sophie ran the intake process. Nora managed the medical program. Braddock, who had taken early retirement to join the foundation full-time, handled the training, matching each veteran with a dog whose temperament and experience aligned with their specific needs. Earl showed up on the first Saturday and never left. The old Vietnam vet from the pharmacy in town drove 40 minutes each way to volunteer, bringing butterscotch candy for the children who visited and war stories for the dogs who pretended to listen. "These dogs understand me better than my therapist," Earl told Ethan once, sitting on the porch with Titan's head in his lap. "And they charge a lot less." The community ceremony happened on the 1-year anniversary of the disposition event. Veterans came from across 3 states, military families, dog handlers, active and retired, Gold Star parents who had lost children in service and found something in the Foundation's mission that spoke to the particular shape of their grief, local officials, news crews, and one very unexpected guest. Agent Mercer drove down from Washington. She stood at the back of the crowd in civilian clothes, watching with the quiet satisfaction of a woman who had spent years chasing a case and finally seen it through to the end. Sophie organized the ceremony. She'd become good at organizing things: events, programs, lives. She'd moved into the foundation full-time 3 months after the trials, bringing her daughter Lily, who had immediately appointed herself chief dog officer and spent her days naming every animal, drawing their portraits, and insisting that each one receive a birthday party with cake. Ethan hadn't planned to speak, hadn't prepared anything, but Sophie was nodding, and the crowd was waiting, and 15 dogs were arranged around him like a military formation. And the words came the way they always came to Ethan Cole: unpolished, unscripted, and real. A year ago, I drove to Fort Sailor because someone sent me a text that said they were selling military working dogs. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have resources. I didn't have anything except a truck, a dog, and a promise I'd made to my best friend. He paused, looked at the dogs. Marcus Webb asked me to get his dog home. That's all he asked. Not to save the world, not to expose a conspiracy, not to build a foundation, just get my dog home, brother. That was the mission. Titan barked once, a single, sharp bark that made the crowd laugh through their tears. But missions have a way of growing. 1 dog became 12, 12 became 15, and somewhere in the middle of all of it, I realized that saving the dogs wasn't really about the dogs. It was about us, about what kind of people we are, about whether we honor the promises we make or walk away when keeping them gets hard. He looked at Braddock, who was standing beside Ranger with tears on his face, at Nora, who had given up her career to tell the truth, at Sophie, who had spent 14 months fighting alone because nobody else would. These dogs served this country with everything they had. They didn't ask for recognition, didn't ask for medals. They just did the job, every day, every mission, every time. Because loyalty isn't something they learned, it's something they are. Ethan's voice dropped. The least we owe them is to be the same. He raised his coffee cup. To Marcus Webb, to every handler who loved their dog more than their own safety, to every dog who served in silence and asked for nothing in return. He looked at Valor, healthy now, standing beside Patricia Webb in the front row, wearing Marcus's dog tags on his collar. And to second chances, for all of us. The crowd raised their cups. To second chances. After the ceremony, after the handshakes and the photographs and the tears that nobody tried to hide, Sophie found Ethan alone on the back porch. Diesel was on one side. Ghost, the old German shepherd from the shelter that Lily had refused to let anyone else adopt, was on the other. "Hey!" "Hey!" She sat beside him. Their shoulders touched. "Good speech." "Wasn't really a speech, more of a ramble." "The best ones always are." She took his hand, held it the way she'd been holding it for months now, naturally, easily, as if their hands had been designed to fit together and had simply been waiting for the right moment to figure it out. "I have something to tell you," Sophie said. "What?" She was quiet for a moment, looked at the field where 15 dogs were chasing each other in the golden light, barking, playing, living the life they'd earned through sacrifice most humans would never comprehend. "I'm pregnant." Ethan stopped. Everything stopped. The dogs, the wind, the waves below the bluff, the rotation of the earth on its axis. All of it paused, just for a second, to let the words find their place in a world that suddenly felt larger and more possible than it had 5 seconds ago. "What?" 10 weeks. Sophie's eyes were bright. "I found out this morning. I know we haven't planned this. I know everything is still—" He kissed her. The way Marcus would have kissed the girl he loved after hearing news like that. Without hesitation, without calculation, without any of the careful distance that Ethan had spent years building around himself to keep from getting hurt again. He kissed her because she had fought beside him and believed in him, and showed up every single day for 15 dogs and 1 broken seal, and never once asked for anything in return. When they pulled apart, both of them were crying. "Is that a good reaction?" Sophie asked. "That's the only reaction." He pulled her close. "A baby. We're having a baby. We're having a baby." Diesel's tail started wagging. Then ghosts. And from the field below, as if carried by the wind, the sound of 15 dogs barking in joy rose up and washed over them like a wave of pure, uncomplicated happiness. Lily came running around the corner with Titan at her heels. "Why is everyone crying? Is it a good crying or a bad crying?" "The best kind of crying, sweetheart." Sophie wiped her eyes and laughed. "Are we getting another dog?" "Something even better." Sophie pulled Lily onto her lap. "You're going to be a big sister." Lily's eyes went wide. She looked at Ethan, looked at her mother, looked at Titan, as if the dog could confirm this information. Then she grinned. "Can we name the baby after a dog?" Ethan laughed. A real laugh. Deep, full, the kind that starts in your belly and works its way up and shakes loose all the grief and the tension and the years of holding everything together by sheer force of will. He laughed until his eyes watered and his ribs ached, and Diesel was jumping on him because the dog had never heard that sound before and wanted more of it. "We'll talk about names later," Sophie said, smiling. Ethan looked at the field, at the dogs running free in the golden light, at the house his grandmother had built on land his family had held for generations, at the woman beside him who had stood up when nobody else would, at the little girl who had turned a sanctuary into a kingdom, at the old Vietnam vet walking across the yard with a bag of butterscotch and a shotgun he no longer needed. Marcus would have loved this. All of it. The dogs, the noise, the chaos of a life so full of purpose that it overflowed into everything it touched. Marcus would have stood on this porch with a beer in his hand and Valor at his feet and said something stupid and perfect like, "See, I told you the dogs would fix everything." And he would have been right. Ethan put his arm around Sophie, rested his hand on Diesel's head, watched the sun begin its descent toward the ocean, painting the world in shades of gold and amber and the deep, permanent blue of a sky that had witnessed everything. The grief, the rage, the corruption, the courage, and was still there, still holding, still promising that tomorrow would come. "Thank you, Marcus," Ethan said quietly, "for sending me on the mission that saved my life." The wind carried his words toward the water, and somewhere below the bluff, Valor lifted his head, looked toward the porch, and wagged his tail. Slow, steady, certain. The wag of a dog who had finally found peace. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment about where you're watching from. Subscribe for more stories of courage, faith, and the quiet strength of those who refuse to look away. And remember this: loyalty isn't a contract. It's a covenant. The heroes who walk on 4 legs deserve the same honor as those who walk on 2. They give us everything: their strength, their courage, their hearts. And they ask for nothing in return except to be remembered. Remember them. The world isn't saved by superheroes. It's saved by ordinary people who keep their promises, and sometimes by the dogs who taught them what a promise really means. Be the person your dog believes you are. Stand up for those who cannot speak. Honor those who sacrifice. And never, never look away when someone needs you. That's the mission. That's the only mission that matters. And it lives in every single one of us. waiting for the moment we choose to answer the call.